Thank you very much, Tim, and we're very happy to have your leadership, both your continuing involvement in this organization and your leadership of, as you say, such a pretty large system, which by itself has both impact just because of what you do and because of what it shows others what can be done. So thank you very much, and to all your colleagues. We now go on to learn about a project undertaken by two of our colleagues at universities in Washington, D.C., which I think, from what I understand, is important, again, both in its own right for what it does in those institutions, but also as an example of something and a replicable model of something that we might think about in one form or another for our own campuses. So to lead that discussion, to start it, is Elizabeth Kish, who is the president of Agnes Scott College, which is a liberal arts college for women, one of the last ones standing in metropolitan Atlanta. She's been the president there since 2006. She's doing a great job. She is the chair of our recruitment and engagement committee and a member of the executive committee of the President Climate's Commitment. Please welcome Elizabeth Kish.
Thank you so much, Wim. I'm going to go ahead and come over here because this is going to be a conversation. I just want to begin by saying both Wim and Tim have, I think, laid out the imperative for climate leadership so strongly for us this morning. And I'm excited that now we can turn to a particular case study of climate leadership by two educational institutions. As Wim and Tim have both said, what we're seeing in the ACU-PCC, what we're seeing in the sustainability movement is a kind of inflection point. All of us have been working so hard to be living laboratories of sustainability and to educate the next generation of sustainability leaders. What we're now seeing is something new, where through collective action, which after all was at the heart of the creation of the ACU-PCC, but through collective action, we are actually able, as higher education leaders, to move the needle on energy use, on energy production in this country. And that is the example that you're going to be hearing about today. So what I'd like to do is to invite President Steve Knapp of George Washington University and President Neil Kerwin of American University up to join me on stage. This is going to be a two-part conversation. The first part will be with the presidents who led this charge, and then we will have a Q&A with Megan Chapple and Chris O'Brien, sustainability directors at George Washington University and American University, who can get more into the details of how this project came together. Each of you should have at your chair a fact sheet on this project. It's called Capital Partners Solar Project. It is a partnership between George Washington University, American University, and George Washington University hospitals, and it is of quite impressive scale. It is the largest solar array east of the Mississippi, and will, when it's completed in 2016, will be 52 megawatt size solar array, producing 123 million kilowatt hours a year of clean, green solar electricity, and providing about 50% of the electricity on each of your campuses. So again, what we're seeing is collective action that's producing something that is really moving the needle on green energy. So I want to applaud Steve and Neil for their leadership of this effort, and I'm excited to find out more about how it happened, what made it work, what the obstacles were, and what we all can learn from it as we continue our own climate leadership. So I want to begin, Steve. I'm going to ask each of you to just share briefly how this came about. How did this project come about, and what role did you as president play within it?
First, I think you've done a great job framing this. And my mic's not on. Can you hear me? No. Then I'm going to walk to the podium. How's that? Oh, no. It just came on.
No? Use
That's hers.
never mind.
I'm not going to walk the podium. I'm going to sit here and take her microphone. Thank you, Elizabeth. Let me start by introducing the two members of my sustainability team who are here. The director of our Sustainability Collaborative, which is a university-wide academic umbrella for the activities, Dr. Kathleen Merrigan, who is formerly the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, and I mention her in case anyone wants to chat with her about what we're doing during the breaks, and who's already been mentioned, Megan Chapple, who joined us in 2009 as the head of our sustainability office and worked with her counterpart, Chris O'Brien at American University. They were really the ones who did the important heavy lifting to get this accomplished. And as Elizabeth said, I mean, you've given the key statistics on the capacity of this. What I think is so critical about it, apart from its benefits to our institutions per se, is that it really does two things. It's a model of collaboration. You know, people often think of universities as competing, you know, for recruiting students, recruiting faculty on the athletic field, whatever it might be. But this is, I think, a model of collaboration that I hope is transportable and to other situations. And second, it's a way of in which we can create a market that stimulates investment in alternative source of energy that otherwise would not occur. And that's what we were looking for when we came together and began to seek potential industrial partners in this enterprise. And I will say that it grows out of collaboration that already existed in Washington, D.C. We have a consortium of 14 universities, 9 of them within the District of Columbia, and President Kerwin is actually currently the chair of the council that leads that consortium of universities in Greater Washington, D.C. And the 9 universities within the district several years ago formed a compact with the District of Columbia, with the mayor in particular, to work together toward helping to make Washington, D.C. an ever greener city. And the result of that has been a number of the kinds of initiatives that you heard about in the case of Mr. Sweat's presentation yesterday about what's going on in Boston. I think you've got mayors leading the charge in both those cases. Now, this one also appears to be out. Is that right? And I'm not sure. Do I have another alternative here?
This one.
All right, here comes another microphone. So this is a, thank you. We'll just keep switching. If there are any other microphones in the audience, just pass them forward. So we already had this interest in collaborating, and in our case, we initially were actually talking to the district about potentially joining us in this arrangement, but they actually went in a somewhat different direction. But we were very fortunate to identify Consumer First Renewables as our consultant, and I think representatives of that company are here in the audience if you want to talk to them. Gary Farha, who's the CEO, is actually with us today and would be happy, I think, to talk to you about the details if you're interested. And we put out a request for proposals, and we've got quite a number of them for both wind and solar, and we selected what we thought was the best one after vetting it for both its financial stability, but also for its environmental impact and so on. So we went through that process and are very pleased, I think, with the outcome. What it's going to mean, as Elizabeth said, is putting, in the case of our 2 universities, 50% of all of our electricity on solar energy, which we're going to bring into the Washington area. It's the result of a production of, as Elizabeth said, 123 million kilowatt hours of electricity on, and this is from 243,000 solar panels that are being installed at 3 sites in North Carolina, and we'll draw that electricity into the Washington area, and then we'll draw, of course, from that along with everyone else in the Washington area. But we have guaranteed a price over 20. That is what enabled our partner, our industrial partner, which is Duke Energy Renewable rather, enabled them to invest in solar energy in a way that would not otherwise, they wouldn't otherwise have done it, we don't believe. So we've helped to create the demand that creates the market that results in production of renewable energy. And so that's, I think, those are 2 ways in which we can, I think, model this for other parts of the country, a model of collaboration and a model of market creation. Want to see if yours works? Or?
Does this one work? How about the other one doesn't? Okay. Let me just reflect, take it back a little bit further for me, and I'm sure Steve would say much the same thing. The initial motivation behind the search for this type of capability really springs from my signing on to the climate initiative in the first place. We made a commitment to be carbon neutral in 2020, and then set a very aggressive program to determine how best to accomplish that. I have to give the students on the American University campus an enormous amount of credit for pushing our institution in this direction. We have a very strong, very active, very, very well-informed environmental group on our campus, driven by students. They pushed me first in the direction of Talwaz and then in the direction of the climate commitment. I think Steve has outlined very well the two fundamental lessons that we've drawn from this. That making a commitment of this sort that is dramatic. I was very comfortable with it, of course, until Vim said it was gigantic. Now I'm concerned. But fundamentally, you can do this, and you can do it in a way that is economically responsible and allows you to balance, as a university president, many of the other commitments that we make to our students and our community. At the end of the day, with the project that was presented to me, it was a very easy yes. And that's what I would hope that most of you confront as you approach this. The other is the critical role that our habit of collaborating played in this process. The consortium now is a very old and well-established institution. It has gone through periods of activity and less activity. But this example that Steve and I have been privileged to participate in, I think serves as a model for consortia like ours that exist all over the United States. It could be, of course, a pre-existing system like Tim's, but it could be just a gathering of smaller colleges somewhere in upstate Michigan that find an opportunity to partner for this very reason, this kind of work. So we feel very, very fortunate, both in terms of our ability to collaborate with Steve and GW in a project that now has given us the security of knowing that we are making tremendous progress toward a commitment that seemed very challenging and now seems less so. And the second, that we've been able to serve, as we hope, a model for others around the country, and frankly, an example that students can look to and take some solace that when they organize, when they push, and when they make a strong case, their universities are going to follow. Chris told me just as we were coming in that he's about to travel to North Carolina, so our students in our sustainability management master's degree will have the opportunity to take a look at this project as it is aborting. I just think that's a marvelous opportunity for young people to participate not just in the educational side of climate and climate commitment, but also see what it takes to physically make it happen.
Thank you so much, and I think you all have touched on such important issues around having a strategic commitment to sustainability that is the framework for this, that's the starting point, and then being able to build on a history of collaboration. I'd be interested in what were some of the obstacles that you had to navigate as you pursued this project. What was the toughest part of bringing this together?
Well, I think the main thing, and the reason presidential leadership, and that's what we're really talking about here, I think is so critical, is it has to be clear to everyone in the university administration that this is a priority, because of course the immediate reaction from the financial side of the institution will always be a skeptical one. You know, we're locking in a price for 20 years, and that has a potential risk to it, right? Because if the prices of energy decline during that period, then we'll actually pay an opportunity cost, because we'll be locked in at a higher rate than we would otherwise enjoy if we had a variable program. But so this is a fixed rate, and as a result of that, we're gambling to some extent on the assumption that energy prices will rise, in which case we'll avoid additional costs. But that is a risk that we had to take as institutions. By the way, our third partner in this, which is the George Washington University Hospital, is an independent corporation. It actually belongs to a parent corporation, UHS, which is a very large company operating many hospitals around the country. And in that case, we persuaded the CEO of the local hospital, who then had to persuade the hierarchy within his company that this was a sensible approach and that made sense in terms of the values of our institutions, but also made sense financially and wasn't going to put the institutions at financial risk. So, so I think that's a matter of persuasion, but it is a matter of presidents, I think, really establishing the parameters within which these kinds of decisions will be made and the values on which these decisions will be based. And I think I want to second something Neil said I think was very important, and that is the tremendous role that students have played in orienting the entire culture of our institutions in a direction that made this possible. And I think we have, as much as presidents, responded to that shift in culture as we have led that shift in culture, but we have to translate that student sentiment into policies that we can use to communicate with our entire staffs and overcome their natural skepticism toward entering into bold arrangements like this.
I didn't. I can't say that I found any part of this process excessively difficult. I mean, it was complicated in the sense that we were attempting to make individual organizational economic models work in a collective environment. So you're never absolutely sure that when you're making these calculations that both institutions or three institutions are going to be able to come to agreement and create a scale that becomes very, very attractive to a private sector organization. And Steve put and I really do want to underscore this point. I mean, our ability to come together this way created the ability of Duke Renewables to go to capital markets and to do other types of work that they might not have been otherwise able to do without customers of our size. And so it puts not just presidential leadership, but the role of universities in a very interesting and somewhat new position. We're not just consumers any longer, we're initiators. We're people and we are organizations that have the capacity to move markets. And if two institutions in the nation's capital, three institutions can come together in a way that is sufficiently interesting to a group like this one to highlight on a panel, just think about the capability that exists when the thousands of private and public institutions across the United States begin to think in the same terms. I mean, what percentage of those would have to come together the way we have to make a really significant impact on the ability of those who want to produce renewables to go to capital markets and say, we got a ready market, and here's the customer, and here's what they're committed to.
Here, part of what makes this case study so exciting for me is that it is Duke Energy, it is the Southeast, it's not a part of the country that has been associated with national leadership on renewable energy. At Agnes Scott, I should mention, we're partnering with Georgia Power on a 20-year contract, of course a much smaller project, but a 20-year contract on solar arrays, one already constructed, and up to 5 more that are in the works. And part of what I found so interesting in that conversation was that Georgia Power, we were the first not-for-profit that they'd had that conversation with. So what's great about your case study is that, as you said, Duke Energy would not have built these solar arrays without you as customers and kind of market initiators. What impact do you think that might have for the Duke Energies of the world? What do you see as the next steps?
I mean, it's very difficult for me to speak to them. I mean, they've got a 20-year fuse lit here, and they're gonna want to see how this works from their side of the aisle. But I think that any energy company of any consequence is going to look at institutions like ours as immensely important clients and customers, not only because of what we consume on a regular basis, but because of the consumers that we're educating on the scale that Tim just mentioned, just in the Cal State system. You know, it was interesting. Last night, just out of pure coincidence, we hosted Bill Reilly on the campus. Bill is associated with our Center for Environmental Policy, and most of you know Bill was the administrator of EPA, and he was then head of the World Wildlife Fund. You know, and you know, Bill reflected, you know, on the generational shift that we've all experienced, and that is the young men and women who come to our campus to be educated as undergraduates have very high expectations about both the behavior of their institution and frankly, what they're able to take away from it to build a life of their own that they think is sustainable. I've got a 36-year-old son with a 4.5-year-old granddaughter. He doesn't have the granddaughter, I do. And his approach to this issue is profoundly different than my approach with him. He's far better educated, far, far more concerned. So I think those of us who are really interested in the sustainability of our enrollments should be very concerned about this issue, however we choose to approach it.
And one other dimension of this we haven't mentioned yet is that this will be an opportunity for us to, it'll be an educational opportunity, research opportunity for our campuses as well. So one of the ways in which I think this model will itself will become a sustainable model is if we can show sort of proof of concept by really understanding how it unfolds. So the question that you're raising about what this will mean for Duke in the long run is an academic question that we can explore, and we can both inform them and other energy companies as we develop the data that will emerge from this process, and also as we explore the best practices that we think are implied by this process and test that against the reality of our experience. So I think it is an academic experiment as well as an opportunity for us financially and in terms of reducing our own carbon footprint.
Great. One last question before we bring your sustainability directors up. What advice would you have for presidents out in the audience who are thinking, wow, I'd love to do a similar project?
I'll say a quick one and then hand it to Neil. I think it's important to prepare the ground. I mean, again, I don't know what every institution's experience is in terms of, or their processes for getting approval for something like this, but when we're putting, you know, half of our electricity on solar energy for a 20-year period, that's something that in our case you can't do without the buy-in of your board of trustees. And to get the buy-in of your board of trustees, you don't want to come to them at the last minute with a surprising opportunity that is not grounded in anything you've ever talked about before. So you do have to prepare the ground, not only with, I mentioned before, with your own administration, particularly on the finance side of the administration, where there was a natural skepticism about any large purchase agreement, understandably, but also with the board, which has to understand why this is a priority and why you're thinking in these terms and what it means to your students, what it means to your alumni. And that is a ground preparation that I think has to take place before you move in this kind of direction. So my advice is, and it applies to so many things, but obviously constant communication with the constituents that you need to bring along so that they're not surprised when you come forward with something like this and say, you know, where did that idea come from and how would something like that ever occur to you? In our case, it was an easy sell because we had been preparing the ground for, well, I've been in this job for 7 years, but for the prior 6 years, we were already working on this with our board and with all our constituents.
It's a great point. I mean, all of us are operating very different governance structures, I'm sure, and conditions, but you know, if you're going to drop something like this on a board of trustees unannounced, you probably ought to do it in your last year of your presidency, all right? Assuming you won't do that, you just take it back to mission. You take it back to the statements of principle and the statements of purpose that every institution in this room has, and you can very, very easily make a very precise chain back to a decision like this. Then on the practical side, you know, we're just very lucky, Steve and I, because we've got great institutions gathered together in a very small physical space. You know, I mean, the District of Columbia is a very, very small town in some ways, with what right now is, according to our own Board of Trade, the greatest college town in America per capita in terms of overall enrollment. So we're going to compete with, you know, the Cal system in SUNY for whatever lying rights we need here. But the point is that, you look for willing partners that are doing the same work you're doing, and then you're looking for the right ears in the utilities and power companies that you're already working with. I don't think this opportunity is going to be available as easy to everyone as it's been available to us, but this notion of consortia, this notion of partnership really is fundamental. And if you begin thinking in those terms, I think, can yield some very interesting results.
Thank you both so much. That was immensely helpful. I'm going to now invite, keep that, I'm coming up here. Please stay. I'm going to invite Megan Chapple and Chris O'Brien to come join us. Megan is the Director of Sustainability at GW. Chris O'Brien is Director of Sustainability at American University. And we wanted to go ahead and throw the floor open for Q&A about the Capital Partners Solar Project. We have, I think, about 15 minutes. 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes for Q&A. So, and we do have a microphone. Vim.
We have multiple microphones.
Yes, some
Question is, do they work? But I'd like to hear more about the financing. Did you not put up any capital and you're just repaying it out of your annual payment? Is that how it works?
We only have 2 mics. Do you want to go ahead, Steve? Okay. Yes, we've set this up as a power purchase agreement. So it's a guaranteed price that we pay over the 20-year period that happens with a lot of work to beat the current price we're paying for our conventional power. So it's through that agreement that we will continue to pay our electricity bill as we have paid it, and it hasn't cost us the upfront capital. We did look at the option of purchasing and decided to not go that route.
There's a question back there. Oh, I'm sorry. I should bring this mic, I guess, since...
Since it is a PPA, how do you deal with the energy credits associated with the PV and how that affects your GHG efforts and climate action plan?
Well, the renewable energy certificates, or RECs, are what makes green electricity green. So without owning them, it's not green electricity. So we retain the renewable energy certificates produced by the solar power, and we purchase the power bundled with the renewable energy certificates. They can be unbundled, and we actually buy renewable energy certificates equivalent to all of the electricity we purchase today, unbundled with, not decoupled from the electricity. And the economics, I think what you're maybe getting at there is that the RECs are not what's financing this. We're not selling the RECs.
Hi, I'm a proud American University alum, so I'm really excited to hear this plan that you're successfully carrying out. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how the students were able to successfully organize and communicate their passion to the administration in order to help push this forward.
Well, I mean, they did it in a number of ways. I mean, the students on our campus, and I'm sure on Steve's, are either AU or GW in a given year is named by Princeton Review as the most politically active campus in America. I mean, you wouldn't want to take that methodology to the bank, but in any event, they are very well versed in how to present a strong argument, and we have multiple venues for them to do it. One that coincided very nicely with this was the development of a new strategic plan for the institution. And in that strategic plan, we made it very plain that we were making a commitment to social responsibility broadly defined, and frankly, a commitment to environmental responsibility much more specifically. They, as I said, they are not just well-versed in organizing, they are very well-versed on technical detail. And those of us who've spent a lot of time in the public policy process know that you can have all the passion in the world, but if your information and your analysis doesn't support it, you're not going to sit at the table very long. These young people, at least in our experience, have come to the table very well versed. They know how to develop an argument. They know how to advocate for it. We don't agree with them 100% of the time, but we certainly agreed with them on this.
Just want to add a little word about that. Is just that I think one of the real signs of hope, and I think this has been mentioned by others during this summit, for the future is the fact that our students are both so passionate but also so sophisticated in their command of this topic, and indeed are so entrepreneurial in their ways of approaching it. So a typical student office hour that I will have will involve a student coming to me and saying, I'd like to start a recycling program in Southeast Washington, D.C., and I say, well, that's a great idea. You know, have you talked to anybody about this? And they'll say, yeah, well, here's my business plan. And by the way, here's a letter of endorsement from the local city council member. And I also talked to Congressman so-and-so who also thinks this is a great idea and is willing to open doors. And that's a typical conversation that we have with students. And again, it's a sign, I think it's a sign of encouragement that our students are both so savvy at the same time that they're so passionately committed to the cause.
Well, I mean, at that point, you're just happy to do it all.
Yeah, right. That's a good question.
This question might be too in the weeds. Sorry, back here. But what factors went into considering the power purchase agreement price with Duke? You know, do we have a sense of what dollars per kilowatt they got? So basically, how do we be aggressive with the companies we work with so we get a good power purchase agreement price? Any guidance would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty straightforward. We issued an RFP. We got, I think, over 40 responses. Most of them were from wind projects, which is what we expected. What we didn't expect was that the couple of the most competitive bids were from solar projects. So we did further due diligence on those and negotiated for the best price.
And one thing that we anticipated but weren't sure of and that we had to test through the RFP process was whether or not the collaborative scale helped us get a better price, and there was a difference there. And I think this is where, you know, my skills were somewhat limited and we had to work with a consultant, and they helped us really work through everything from transmission cost to the actual PPA price. We looked at all those factors.
All right, take just two more questions. We've got one here, one there.
So I'm Karen Hilgersum, a president of SUNY Sullivan, a small community college, and I am a former alum. Where did Tim White go? Where is he? Cal State Stanislaus, Turkey Tech. Yes. Couldn't have done this without y'all. And my husband is actually an alum of University of Idaho, so I think we owe you a drink tonight. Anyway, that said, I'm in the process of completing a PPA agreement, and one of the things that surprised me about the contract piece was how difficult it was to find an attorney who could really protect the interest of the college and really help us through that process. Because in that process, I realized that the developer has actually 2 layers of finance entities who are assisting them with the array. They were not willing to give us complete control of the RECs. That was a topic of intense negotiation. And at some points, I felt like I was negotiating with the oil industry, which was so surprising to me. Now, I think all's well that ends well. We have a lot of support, and I think we're just about done, maybe even by Friday, and ready to go. We've even broken ground to an extent. But any feedback you have on that piece, and is there a growing number of attorneys in this country who can help small colleges who do not have attorneys retained on staff get through this really exciting process?
Well, each of the partners had our own internal counsel, but we also brought an outside legal team in to advise us on exactly the issues that you're describing. And you know, you can talk with the folks that were mentioned earlier at Customer First Renewables. They can direct you to that legal team.
I've got a question. I'm Bill Johnson. I've been on the board for Second Nature for a number of years and have seen and heard a lot of really good ideas. Have you as a team considered putting together a white paper on what you have done and how you have done it? Because I think there are a lot of people in this room that might not be able to use it as a prescriptive document, but it would at least give them a programmatic document that they could go down the list and say,
what have we missed, what do we need to do, how big is this issue, and putting together a white paper on this, I think would be fascinating for the group.
Steve says it's a good idea. But to your point, we are looking for, we were really honored to have the chance to talk to folks here. We'll be doing a webinar with the US EPA Green Power Partnership next week. We can share details on that, and there probably will be opportunities to publish and work through the case.
I think that's a great idea, and there are other PPA examples out there. I did want to mention that the University of California just announced a few weeks ago a PPA that is the largest ever. It's at a quite amazing scale. It's an 80 megawatt project. Again, multiple campuses and multiple health centers. So this is happening. It's happening at the campus scale. It's also happening at this kind of consortial scale. And Bill, I think your idea of Second Nature and the ACU PCC being a clearinghouse for sharing ideas and best practices, and also potentially as a YENTA for bringing together institutions that want to collaborate, that might be a very helpful next step coming out of this.